Hi, I'm Richard Poynter with Poynter Landscape Architecture. Here to talk to you about watering and the importance of the watering cycles, particularly as you get your new plants established in the first year or two.
I have newly planted shrubs, perennials, and trees. How do I water to make sure they flourish?
So sleep, creep, and leap really refers to plants getting themselves established over a couple of year period of time. So sleep really refers to the first year where the root system is developing and you don't really see a whole lot coming from the top foliage, the part that you see. Creep is what happens in the second year where the root system is developed to a certain degree, it's getting itself established in this new environment, and you see some growth. Leap is really the third year when the root system is fully integrated and adjusted to your soils, and you really see the benefit of that on the top, which is the foliage coming out, and you see more growth or longer growth or larger leaves, or all three. This is of course true for perennials, shrubs, and trees. It's a little bit more noticeable on perennials, but the theory is the same because it follows the development of the root system over the first couple of years of reestablishment. Difficult weather or environmental conditions will equal stress. Stress sometimes that you see on the surface or on the foliage sometimes can be delayed by a season. So if we were to have an extremely difficult summer this year, you might see that stress show up during the summer when it's hot out, but you also might see some level of stress show up in the next spring or the next summer. This is true, of course, of wintertime and summertime. A warm summer or a cold winter doesn't necessarily equal stress. More extreme conditions can have a tendency to develop that. Reviewing our irrigation chart about how to water by the holidays gives you some guidelines that use common holidays in order to help you understand how you should adjust your irrigation programming throughout the season. So one of the more important things that you need to do is program your irrigation system in such a way that you build gaps into the watering. Gaps help the plants breathe with oxygen in between the watering. So plants need nutrients in the soil, they need water, and they need oxygen. You can't really overwater in a given week or even really 2 or 3 weeks. It takes about 4 to 5 weeks to overwater. Overwatering really is a function of no oxygen. So when it rains or when you use your irrigation system and you flood the soil with water, you effectively fill the air cavities with water and cut off the oxygen supply. So the plants want a gap in between. So over here, they want to be wet, moist, wet, moist. So they want this gap in between waterings right here where it would be moist to be large enough in order to allow the oxygen to come back in, where they're not completely dry, but the oxygen moves back into the soil, the plants can breathe. So they're sort of function like a whale does. Maintaining the gap in between waterings ends up being important. It's more important than the issue about how much to water from a volume standpoint. The depth of the root system of what you're watering is going to be impacted by the gap. So when we have grass plants like here that are 3 to 4 inches tall and the root system is a similar depth, it might be 2 to 3 inches deep, gravity is going to pull the water out of the availability of that root system relatively quickly within a few days. On a tree, on the other hand, the water is going to get pulled out of the availability of that root system over a much longer period of time. Sometimes it could take a week or 10 days. So here we've sort of drawn the matrix of soil composition, where we've enlarged the white spaces here to kind of represent oxygen. And so again, when you water or when it rains, those cavities fill up with water, cut off the oxygen supply. Gravity slowly pulls that water through the soil and ends up getting oxygen. Thus you end up with these gaps or gaps in your watering that allow water, oxygen, water, oxygen. So as we talk about watering frequencies, really not about volume, about frequencies, and you can refer to our chart that we have on watering by the holidays. But effectively, Tax Day, you're going to be at 1 day a week. Mother's Day, you're going to be at 2 days a week. Father's Day, you're at 3 days a week. By Labor Day, you're at twice a week. By Columbus Day, you're at once a week. And by Halloween, you're shutting your system down. Now, of course, this is all true for turf. When it comes to shrubs, they have the exact same needs that turf does. Plants all have the same needs about needing water and oxygen. But your beds, plants, shrubs, perennials, have a root system, as we've shown here, that is deeper in the ground than what your turf is. And so the gaps need to be larger in between, allowing gravity to pull water through the soil. So in your beds, you're going to go once a week by tax day. By Father's Day, you're going to go to twice a week. But by Father's Day, and you go to twice a week, you're going to increase the volume as well. By Columbus Day, you're going to go back to 1 day a week. So for beds, it's not about increasing the frequency as the temperature gets warmer. It's about increasing the volume. For turf, on the other hand, because the root system is so short, it's really not about increasing the volume, it's about increasing the frequency. So it's the same principle, it's a little bit different based on the depth of the root system. So the deeper the root system of any plant that you have, the bigger the gap has a tendency to need to be. So when your irrigation service company comes over to start up your irrigation system, it's very common for them to put in a very generalized program that they use for all their customers. In a lot of cases, it's generalized enough that it's probably 10 minutes to maybe 25 or 30 minutes every other day. And they're using this program across the board. And for a well-established landscape, like yours will probably be in a couple of years, a program like that probably won't hurt anything. But in the early stages, when you're trying to get things established the first couple of years, these gaps between watering are pretty important. So you can use our chart that you have for irrigation programming by the holidays, give that to your irrigation service company, and have them program your system appropriately. Effectively, what it means is that they'll put in the program that's appropriate based on the date, so that's typically going to be tax day or early April. And then a couple of irrigation adjustments that you have to make to the program or something that your irrigation company may be willing to come out and do for you, but for the most part, you need to know how to program your system and how to make minor adjustments to it. So again, irrigation service companies are good at managing water through pipes, but they're not always necessarily skilled or educated in the horticulture or plant biology that they need. So the first couple of summers that your plants go through are pretty critical. As long as you have these gaps in between waterings, you'll be able to give them water, oxygen, and you won't end up having an overwatering situation. Again, overwatering is really just a matter of having too much water in the ground, therefore cutting off the oxygen supply. So we've talked about watering and the watering gaps that are required, and we have the program chart for your watering by the holidays. When it comes to volume of water, on the irrigation program chart by watering by the holidays, there are some guidelines on there for you, and they're general guidelines and you can feel free to use them. The other thing is that it's necessary when you're watering to put about 1/3 of an inch of water down when you're watering, or 1/3 to 1/2 anyway. So what you can do to test that, because all irrigation systems are different, the amount of water pressure you have, the number of heads on a zone will all impact the area about how much water is actually putting out during a normal operation. So what you can do is just take any kind of bowl, cup, something with a reasonably wide brim. We'll take it out here and we'll put it out in the turf. We'll just set it out here in the middle of the turf area. Then we're going to go back over to the irrigation clock and we're going to turn on the irrigation system. And then we're going to let it run for a period of time, and then we'll measure the amount of water that we have. So we'll go over here to zone 5, which is that particular zone. And we'll let it run for 40 minutes and we'll see how much water we have. Okay, so the irrigation system is run now for 40 minutes in this particular case. I got a tape measure. We're going to measure how much water is in the bowl. Right here we have right at about 1/2 inch of water. So for this particular system, and yours could easily vary, we've gotten in 40 minutes, gotten about 1/2 inch of water. So 1/2 inch is probably the most amount that we probably want to put down in any single watering. It's not that you can't put more down than that. It's not that if it rains we wouldn't sometimes get 2 inches of rain in a day. But once you start getting a ½ inch of water down, the ground isn't really going to absorb a whole lot more anyway. So it ends up being a little wasteful of the resources to like put more water down in a single watering when you're using city water. So we've talked to you about watering turf. We've talked to you about watering shrubs and beds. The other thing a lot of times you end up having is annuals. Flowers that you plant in the spring that give you that color that you're looking for, whether they're in containers or whether they're in your beds. So the root system of flowers, like turf, is relatively short. So they're gonna need watering a little bit more often. The gaps cannot be quite as long. So you probably wanna water annuals similarly that you would turf. But in containers where the soil is relatively porous and drains really well, as the plants grow and develop, and as they flower more, they use a little bit more energy, they use a little bit more water. So it wouldn't be uncommon on annual areas to like have to supplement your watering in beds so that you're watering probably every other day, and when it gets hot in the summertime you might have to water every day. So what we want to be careful of doing is that if you have your program set up for your beds to be watering 2 days a week in the summertime, and then maybe increasing the run time a little bit, that might going to be fine for everything in your beds, but it probably wouldn't be appropriate for your annuals. So those you just need to take a hose out and water those a couple extra times during the week in the gaps. This way you're giving the water that's necessary for your shrubs, the appropriate amount of water, and then you supplement that for your containers. So if your flowers that you've planted are in pots or urns, they're going to dry out much more quickly. The soil that typically you'd use for flowers is going to be something like this. It's very lightweight. It's called Pro Mix or a soilless mix. Very lightweight. It dries out relatively quickly, which is great for the flowers. That's really what they're in need of. So you're going to need to water more often. Sometimes once they get a little bit established, maybe sometimes even within a few weeks, by the time you get to the 1st of June, they may need water every day. Certainly every other day anyway, on the onset. If we set up a separate irrigation zone for your urns, which a lot of times we'll do, they'll either have something like this, which is drip irrigation. So you can see like these little spots in here, those are emitters. So a irrigation zone like this will just drip, drip, drip. A zone like this might have to run for an hour in order to give a good heavy dosage. Other times they'll use a round emitter. It looks a little bit more like the top of a spray head, and those can put out a lot more water. So with your flowers, you need to like sort of test your irrigation system and see how long it takes to get a good thorough soaking. It could be a minute and a half and it could be an hour. The emitters can really vary that much, so it's important that you sort of know that. If you do have separate zones like this for in irrigation for your urns, you'll probably want to program those for every other day early in the season, and probably by the time you get to June you'll probably need to be at every day.